say f***ing?
Only when describing somebody you don't like.
Let me warm up, though.
What am I going to do if you ask me something I don't like?
I'm not sure I'm going to be any good because I'm used to on this side of the camera.
Now's my chance to whitewash it.
Okay, I'm ready.
To me, it's like a dream that the next name is Margaret Thatcher.
The founder and leader of Bangladesh was killed in a coup.
Aimed a loaded pistol at President Ford at point-blank range today.
Next, it's Wheel of Fortune, a new spin-to-win game of fun and bragging.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
And missing too was Jimmy Hoffa, presumed murdered.
Help us find our father.
You have to think about what was happening in the world in the 60s and 70s broadly. There seemed to be trust in government. A lot of that began to erode and erode in a very major way. And then, of course, Watergate happened, which changed the situation entirely as well. Two reporters from the Washington Post seized on that story, which ultimately resulted in the resignation of the President of the United States.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Suddenly, investigative journalism became extremely popular. Everyone wanted to do it. And the CBC is one of them. And then by 1974, a very visionary leader joined the CBC. He was a pretty young guy at the time, Peter Herndorf. He became head of current affairs. And he had a vision that investigative journalism needed to be done in a more serious and thoroughgoing way.
He used the word iconoclastic. An iconoclastic news magazine that would deal with things of great public importance and interest.
You can draw a direct line between him, between what was going on in Canada and in North America at that time, and the creation of the Fifth Estate.
The Fifth Estate.
When I came, I said that. What's that name all about? What is the Fifth Estate? And I couldn't get a straight answer right away. It's like people forget after a long time. I mean, isn't the Fifth Estate, the Fourth Estate is the media, is journalism, is it not? And so the Fifth Estate is one step further.
The cold, hard truth is, the Fifth Estate is a terrible name because no one understands what it means. And it's exacerbated by the fact that our arch rivals in broadcasting over at the other network, CTV, have a brilliant name. It's brilliant in its simplicity, W5. Who, what, where, when, why.
Everybody was asked, what do you think the show should be called? And interestingly enough, one of our producers said, oh, God, let's just give it up. Why don't we just call it Apple?
I do know this for a fact. The title only came about 3 weeks before the first show of the Fifth Estate ever went to air.
We did the Fourth Estate, right? And then we thought, well, the Fifth Estate. So then everybody said, we're so tired. We said, okay, let's just call it the Fifth Estate. And, you know, it took.
The reputation for the Fifth, certainly amongst camera people, was this was the brass ring.
One of the things that the Fifth Estate is famous about is the confrontational interview. In the business, we tend to call them jumps.
Put that goddamn thing down, will you? You hear what I'm telling you?
Just easy.
Stop and talk to me for a second. What were you doing with documents relating to the building of an atomic bomb? Thank you.
Mr. Acuna, please don't run away. If you could just give me a minute of your time.
I'm with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Sorry, you're just wasting your time.
What can you tell those families who've been torn apart by flawed tests about what happened and how that could happen in your lab, sir? Doctor, you can't simply walk away. These families deserve some answers.
I hated jumps. I really did. You had to be able to anticipate what your subject might do. You had to read people.
I'm working on a months-long investigation on war criminals from Somalia. We find out that one of the worst war criminals in our story works as a security guard at a car dealership. We jump out of the van, we go up to the man, he's surprised. Mr. Toke, you're accused of being a war criminal. What do you say? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. He kind of runs away, closes the door. Bang, we got it. Come away, and the cameraman says, oh, I didn't turn on the camera.
From time to time, you'll do what's called a double click. Accidentally, you hit record and then you hit it again. Now you're not recording.
So we go back the next night. This time he's not totally surprised. Same questions, not as good as the first time, but it's still pretty good. He's still, no, I'm innocent. I don't know what you're talking about. Slams the door shut. Cameraman says, sorry guys, it didn't work again. Now we have to go back the third time, right? By this time I feel like telling this accused war criminal, sir, just walk closely, don't look at the camera. We're going to ask you the same questions about being a war criminal. You've done this before. And we actually film it the third time. And that's the scene that actually makes it to air.
I'd like to talk to you about your days as a military commander in Somalia. Sir, there have been some very serious allegations made about you by people in Gibile.
It always looks perfect and clean when you see it on TV, but as they say, the two things you never want to see being made are hot dogs and television.
So I was the first staff cameraman to go on Fifth Estate. I was the eyes. And don't forget those days, the film, it was all film, there was no digital. Every mile was discovery for us. So when you work with a show like Fifth Estate, each story took me someplace I've never been there before and opened a new door. Fantastic.
I think that's the essence of the show. I mean, the researchers who actually had themselves to do a lot of the digging, the show wouldn't have functioned without them.
Access to information is like a series of laws all across this country that help the public know what their government is doing. So these would be basic operation documents. It could also be secrets that the government doesn't want the public to know. When I started in journalism, access information was my main tool for investigating. So I was able to file requests, get them back within 30 days. Now, it takes me months, if not years, to get really basic information back. The result of these delays is that we can't find out what's happening.
It's a job that is somewhat thankless because you're more or less at the bottom of the pyramid. And no one's going to say, did you see the research in that show on the 5th last night?
The way I found out that Inspector Claude Savoie was possibly corrupt was in the summer of 1992. It was off-season for the Fifth Estate, and I was exploring for stories.
Dan Burke, like me, a fellow Montrealer who knew a lot of police, but Dan also knew a lot of bad guys. He knew a lot of criminals. He had great contacts. And he came to me and he said, we should do a story on Canada's biggest drug trafficker who never got caught in Canada. His name was Alan the Weasel Ross.
These two drug dealers remember an incident in the Montreal port in the early 1980s.
A friend of mine who had a container of hashish coming from Lebanon, from Europe. He told them that don't go near that container is going to be picked up. He knew it was going to be picked up.
How would Alan Ross know that the police were going to seize a particular container?
I have no idea how he knew.
He wasn't an informant, nor was I an informant for him, and I knew him. I met him. Put it that way, I met him.
The day before the story was about to air, I got a call at my office at the Fifth Estate from an RCMP officer in Toronto. He said, at 11:55 a.m. today, Claude Savoie took out a Silver's revolver, wrapped it around his jacket, and put a gun to his head and blew his brains out. That certainly was a validation of the story.
We didn't pull the trigger, but you can't not think that, if Dan Burke and Hannah Gartner and I, if the Fifth Estate hadn't started on this story, if we'd gone on to some other story, that man would still be alive. That's what investigative journalism is about. You better be f***ing sure, because you're playing with people's lives.
Prima facie case of fraud. What exactly does that mean for the laymen of the world, like my brother and I? Either there's a fraud or there's not a fraud. Either I'm guilty of murder or I'm not guilty of murder.
So I was heartbroken. I was betrayed. My cousin hurt me, and now I want to hurt him.
Guys killed their, killed their son-in-laws, guys killed their brother-in-laws, guys killed their cousins. And that's what it takes. You have to be totally ruthless and devoid of any feeling that you show for anybody.
How realistic did you think the expectation that you would capture him was?
I was never trying to capture him. I thought I would kill him. Yeah, I thought I would kill him.
Who said I have 20 wives and 80 children?
Oh, how many wives and how many children do you have then?
Well, I'm certainly not here to talk about my private life.
That's your private life? I got one husband, I'll tell you.
Well, good for you. And I hope you love him and take care of him and don't criticize him and support him and do all the things that wives should do with their husbands.
You're paraphrasing what I said. And it's called hack journalism. It's called hack reporting. And they take a little clip and they focus on that. It is what it is. Carry on. I got the opportunity to stay here and do the Fifth Estate. It's kind of cool. It's kind of nostalgic. I'm kind of fanboying right now.
Yeah, as long as the Fifth Estate's been on the air, people have been trying to shut down, kill our stories, shut down our investigations. They contact our bosses. They'll be, pressuring people not to talk to us or change their story. They intimidate us. So what do? Well, you muster your courage. You fortify your facts. You take a deep breath. Then you say, bring it on.
Gerald Regan, who was the Premier of Nova Scotia and alleged to have committed many of the same sorts of sexual improprieties that Nygaard did. They're all despicable human beings who are taking advantage of others.
We're talking about an unbelievably powerful man, the most powerful man in the province.
Around here, connections count. Patronage is a way of life. If you want something, it's not uncommon to go right to the boss.
The president of the CBC then, Al Johnson, pulled the plug on it. He told the Fifth Estate to back off.
This was an extraordinary story. We're talking about a man who was a former premier and was a cabinet minister.
Excuse me, I don't care. I don't care whether he was Mickey Mouse. That has nothing to do with it.
Did anyone close to Gerald Regan, anybody in the liberal government try to intercede, give you a call?
I knew you would come to this, and it's absolutely preposterous.
So we did the story, some 14 years later, and interviewed a dozen of his victims. They were children when this happened. Some were 15, 16 years old. They were still nervous and afraid, but it validated what they had been through.
I do remember that you did not want to be in a situation where you were alone with him.
So after the show went to air, I was invited to go down to Halifax to MC some event. I was pulled off to the side and was told, we have a new guest who insinuated himself into the process. Gerald Regan wants to be with the VIPs in the front row at your knee, and he wants you to introduce him. I did not introduce him.
It takes 5 minutes to reach a verdict.
The big question of the new Romanian government, apparently, was whatever happened to the billions and billions and billions of dollars that had been under his control. They should have asked him before they shot him in the garden.
From the start, it was clear that the search for Ceausescu's money wasn't going to be easy. He and his advisors had installed a complex system which diverted most of the national wealth through their hands.
And there was an application before the Ontario courts for an injunction to prevent our broadcast, and it came down like a day or two before. And I remember, you know, the court convened in the boardroom at the Fifth Estate. Judge, you know, the lawyers for all parties. And it became obvious to us that the government of Romania was behind this.
This was an example of a government trying to stop a Fifth Estate story from proceeding.
Anyway, we appealed it, and in the few days while the court was sort of dealing with the appeal, this became a national, scandalous media story about this unbelievable, brazen intrusion in freedom of the press.
In the 70s, one of the themes that the producers of the Fifth Estate tried to expand on was doing deep dives into the business community, something that media hadn't really done much of up until that point.
How would you characterize the average potato farmer who sells to McCain's? Smart. There's a quote about your potato contract. Somebody said that it's a contract written for dishonest people, and that's...
No, it's not dishonest. The farmers in this area aren't dishonest, and you shouldn't repeat that.
That was a quote from your brother.
No.
And there was giant pushback. Letters were written, complaints were made. There were McCain relatives in Parliament at the time.
I mean, I've heard of employees who have made statements before, and within a half an hour of making the statement, there's a phone call to the deputy minister saying so-and-so said such and such. Please make sure he doesn't do it again.
And everybody's telling me that half the population is under the age of 25. And unless you're going after this business, you're not even in this garment business.
Peter Nygaard was then, if not the richest man in Canada, certainly one of them. He was a billionaire who had his way, and that extended to sexual harassment and assault. And we started to report back in about 2010.
The Panther parties had nothing to do with trying to find a model. It was basically to procure women so that he would have the pick of the litter to decide who he was going to bet for the night. And that's how it would end.
Peter Nygaard has already sued the Fifth Estate in 2 jurisdictions. In New York, he tried to get possession of video we'd shot. He lost. And he sued in Winnipeg trying to stop this story from going to air.
Usually when someone sues you for libel or slander, it's a financial issue. They sue you for an amount of money. That was not the issue when Peter Nygaard took us to court, because Nygaard had us charged with criminal libel under the Criminal Code of Canada, which meant that if we were found guilty of that libel, we weren't going to owe him any money. What was going to happen was we would be convicted of a felony and be imprisoned. So for 10 years, we worked and did the story under the shadow of imprisonment.
The story that the Fifth Estate devoted almost 2 years of time was the story of the wrongful conviction of Stephen Truscott. Stephen Truscott was Canada's most famous murderer, accused of killing a classmate, 1959, sentenced to hang, goes to prison, disappears after parole, and decades later he comes to the Fifth Estate. We start investigating. And for me, I knew this was going to be probably the biggest story of my career. I get a call from the executive producer at the time, and he says, the host on the story has a romantic relationship with Stephen Truscott's lawyer. We could not do a story attempting to prove the innocence of Canada's most famous accused murderer if the journalist on our story had a relationship with his lawyer. The question was the perception. What would the public think, right? So after a lot of debate and discussion, we said, we have to kill the story. It was one of the worst moments of my career to tell that to the Truscotts. But we waited a long, long period of time. And then we decided with a new host, it was Lyndon McIntyre, we could go back to the Truscotts. It was a clean slate. And we started the investigation again. And in the end, we produced one of the most famous documentaries the Fifth Estate ever did that had huge impact and eventually cleared his name.
We didn't have any female producers for, well, 3 years, or 3 or 4 years. And it was very, very masculine and macho, and most of the male hosts had terrible alcohol problems. It made them sometimes not at their best, let's just say. One of them said to me, "You're a girl, you can't come." But it never affected me or what I wanted to do.
One of the things I've always prided myself on is that your reputation is what you have as a good journalist. You have to make sure that you got your I's dotted, your T's crossed, that your facts are absolutely correct. The most embarrassing thing for me, and I think for the Fifth Estate historically, was a lawsuit which was the largest lawsuit for libel, probably in the history of Canada. And that dealt with 2 doctors and a heart drug. First of all, these 2 doctors wanted a very meager settlement, but an apology. It was appealed to the Ontario Superior Court. And they looked over all of the documentations and they ruled that the judge and all the documentation that they found, that it was right, that the Fifth Estate had done certain things that were libelous, and awarded, I think it was close to $4 million. The thing is, it stays with you. And I think it stayed with the Fifth Estate for a long time. And you know, you have a really, really good show, and all you need is one slip up, and people remember that.
I want my money. Today, Lorenzo says he's gonna grab you, he's gonna turn you into a pretzel. And don't with him, bro.
I don't want to with nobody, man.
Just how many more embarrassing videos can there be? This one, recently obtained by the Toronto Star, shows a very agitated and angry mayor of Toronto.
Brother, you've never seen me fucking go, brother. You think so, brother? But when he's down there, I'll rip his fucking throat out, I'll poke his eyes out, I will when he's dead, I'll make sure that motherfucker's dead.
I like to put a fucking gun right down the mouth of the bullet. Get him so we call, crack your fucking heads.
I did several shows in Ireland at the time of the Troubles. We were in terrible danger all the time, and we never had any protection or anything. Our cameraman was focusing on the terrace houses, which all look very alike. Suddenly, we were surrounded by British soldiers, all with their guns cocked. And for the first and only time in my life, I knew what the taste of fear was. Fear tastes metallic. It tastes like you licked the inside of a tin can, and it just came up in me. And afterwards, we all said to each other, well, we could have died.
We were in San Francisco. We were following this Canadian man who's trying to establish an independent state for Sikhs in India. And we know from a US indictment that allegedly the Indian government had hired a hitman to take him out. And their instructions to him were, kill him and anyone around him. The advice we got from the CBC risk assessment team was that we should wear bulletproof vests and have security with us. We're heading to the venue. I'm in the back of the Suburban, sitting beside him. His armed security are in the front of the vehicle. We're on our way. As we get close to this venue, we get caught up in pedestrian traffic. There's thousands of people here to listen to this man speak. I realize as I'm looking out the window, it would be so easy for someone to step out of the crowd, spray the vehicle with bullets, kill this man, and take me with him.
Mubarak Ali Shah Jalani was charged with international terrorism and so on and so forth. He had a very shadowy organization, shady in every single way. These guys were involved in all kinds of dubious terror schemes, assassinations, and so on and so forth in the United States. The story aired a few months later, called Seeds of Terror.
What are we to make of that?
This is all lies. All lies.
The FBI reached out to me and said, that was great. We've wanted to talk to this guy for a long time. Can you share with us the transcript or the details of the interview that we did with him? It escalated all the way to the exec producer, and it went to lawyers and so on and so forth. Segue 25 years later, The FBI declassified all the documents in their possession, and one document in particular surfaced with my name on it. I was shocked out of my mind that the FBI wouldn't redact my name. A lot of his followers are still active and are still around, and it made me feel very uncomfortable and very insecure about my own security.
There's a famous journalistic expression, and it is that the first casualty of war is truth.
This was just after the first Gulf War. And there was an absolute hue and cry among Americans in particular to get involved. It hinged on a set of hearings by a congressional committee of some kind and by some hearings in front of the United Nations. And in the centerpiece of these hearings was a young woman who appeared on television over and over and over again. She was identified as a refugee from Kuwait, and she was the one that tearfully, on camera, gave the most colorful and dramatic account of what had happened in those hospitals.
They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
And she had a single name, Naira. The problem was we couldn't find her anywhere. Associate producer was sort of so diligent at all of this stuff. She was going through newspapers, Washington newspapers, going back for the longest time to find out, just fishing, to see if she could get a clue. Her name was Leslie Fruman, and she sees a picture of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States and Canada with his family. And who should be standing by his side? It was his daughter. Nobody knew this. So this key witness to this dubious atrocity was the daughter of the ambassador. So Leslie did what journalists should do. She called the Kuwaiti embassy in Washington. And she says, "Hi, I'd like for you to arrange for me to be able to have a chat with Naira." And there was a long pause on the end of the phone, and the next thing was, "Why do you want to talk to her?" "Well, I'd like to talk about her appearance before the Congressional Committee on this and that and the other thing." Another long pause, and that the sweetest words you ever hear in journalism. "Well, you're not supposed to know about that."
And the Emmy goes to the Fifth Estate to sell a war, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, Canada.
Afterwards, I remember walking along the corridor with Lyndon and I and David Frost, who presented us with the award. And David Frost turned to me and said, "How do you think I did in the presentation?" And David Frost, of course, was famous as a presenter at this time, and it just felt bizarre for David Frost to be asking me how he did, I mean, on stage. But it was a great moment.
But he came up to me, stuck his finger in my face. I thought he was going to bop me, frankly, and said, "What you're doing is j'accuse." I guess we were. You accused your son of being a paid co-conspirator in...
I didn't accuse him.
Yes.
I said I feared, no, just cool it. I said I thought, and I wasn't going to accuse him. Accuse is j'accuse. That's what you're doing to me now.
Sandy Munro was talking about the son. I brought up the son, and he said the son is terribly mentally disturbed. He's a very sick man.
Rory is not well. I would like you to respect his privacy. I was there in the doctor's office when we were told that he was mentally ill and always would be. I think because of his illness, he deserves a pass on this. I really do.
Well, somebody tells you don't go and talk to somebody, you're on the plane.
Rory Munro, as it turns out, is a man who does not want to be found. No phone number, no driver's license, no known address.
Figured a guy living on a boat with 3 kids would need groceries, so we started calling around. Bingo. A clerk at a local grocery store recognized the name, and that's how we found Rory Munro.
He was
strangling her on the kitchen counter, and he left for weeks. And one of my biggest resentments with my mother had been that she let him back in the house afterwards.
Was she afraid?
Yes. She was afraid of him. We all are.
Sometimes the person sitting across from us isn't telling the truth, but it's not because they're lying.
Canada used to be one of our most loyal friends, and vice versa. I mean, Canada sent troops to Vietnam. Was Vietnam less containable and more of a threat
No, actually,
than
Canada
Saddam
did
Hussein?
not send troops to Vietnam.
I don't think that's right.
Canada did not send troops to Vietnam.
Indochina?
No. Canada, Second World War, of course. Korea, yes.
I think
Vietnam,
you're wrong.
No, it took a pass on Vietnam.
I think you're wrong.
No, Australia was there, not Canada.
I think Canada sent troops. Well, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Sticks and Stones was a story that actually is resonant today. It's about misinformation, disinformation in U.S. government and media. The next week, she was on the front page of Time magazine, and she called me names. And she said, I don't think he knew his Canadian history. Well, it was pretty easy to know more Canadian history than Ann Coulter.
Killers, crooks, cons, bullies, they have a very similar profile. David Reiner was a bookkeeper. He stole less than $1 million, like I think it was $800,000, but he stole it from children's daycare, and it really captured the imagination of the audience. He skipped the country after stealing this money, and he ended up in Africa. We found him. We were going to bring him home to face justice. The night before we leave, he approaches me with an idea.
It's a thought I had last night.
Right.
He thought what great timing it would be to come home the day after this was aired.
I don't think we can give you a ticket and say, whenever it's convenient, see you later.
Why not? Have I let you down?
I don't think so.
You can't trust me.
I don't think we can do that.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, the man was conning me, was hustling me in front of my own camera.
When someone's very angry, that's an authentic moment. And that's what TV at its best.
Well, Ambassador, we're talking about relations between the two countries. Relations between the two countries have been dominated by the question of the reactor.
I have nothing more to discuss. You can leave.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Because it's a complete violation of what you agreed to.
Do you feel that you should resign?
I'm very sorry. Will you stop that, Ken? I'm very sorry. I really cannot be treated like this.
Questions about the objectivity of your study results.
I won't talk about that.
Why not? It's an important public issue.
I'm not on this. I'm not going to talk about it.
Well, doesn't the integrity, doesn't the objectivity...
I'm going to walk out 1 minute.
But you as a reporter want to make up some bullshit. So make it up. It's over with.
I think the beauty of television is you can capture authentic moments with people, and they're gold dust to any film.
You said that you would confront the problem head-on with the unions. Now, the last prime minister who tried to do that...
Can I just correct you?
I think that was one of our mandates. We were told that we're going to go all over the world. We're going to find the stories that matter to Canadians, and I think we still should be.
Do you want India to continue as a united entity, or do you want anarchy?
Is there not something wrong with the piece when it creates such division, such predictions of violence in your community, Jew against Jew?
I admit that war unites more than peace. So, shall we go to war in order to achieve union? Or shall we make the necessary compromises in order to enable your children and my children to live in peace?
There's too much presidential power, no true democracy, too few human rights.
What lack of human rights do we have when people are allowed to vote?
Noor Chowdhury says he was not there that early morning of your father's assassination. He says he was not there.
Absolutely lie.
It was possible that Osama bin Laden was in that location. Do you recall that meeting?
Please, I don't even want to comment on what he says. He would be filling in all lies.
Now, this is an interconnected world. All stories are local now, everything. Canadian angle is such an outdated notion in journalism. We are all in the same boat now. And that boat is in rough waters in a lot of different places. It's just by virtue of the fact that we're all on the same shrinking planet. And we are all related to everybody else. And every story that happens is our story.
It's the CFL's occupational hazards, say players and their families, brain disorders like Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, and chronic traumatic encephalopathy called CTE, conditions that can be linked to concussions playing football, a toll felt in Ottawa and all around the CFL.
That was a story about concussions in sport, specifically for me in professional football. I played pro football for several years before I became a full-time journalist. And I think my family would tell you that they were fearful of what the impact ultimately of that and all the concussions I suffered, and there were several at least, and the impact all of that would have on my later life.
It was really interesting working with Bob on the concussion story because it was such a personal story to him. A big part of it was literally about the potential damage that might have been done to his brain. You could see that as much as he was willing to open up, there were certain things that were still off limit because it was so sensitive.
Before we go any farther, I should tell you, this is one of the most difficult Fifth Estate stories I've ever had to tell because I'm part of it. For 5 years here at Lansdowne Park, I played for the Ottawa Rough Riders. So I'm a member of that generation of Canadian Football League players, now in the shadow of the condition called CTE.
I don't think it was unfair for me to do that story, though I absolutely had a stake in it, because it just gave me a leg up in terms of who would talk to me. I guess the point of it was the Canadian Football League has not really done what I think it is morally obligated to do to protect its players from the worst of concussions.
The Matt Lepine story was about the worst mass shooting in Canada, and in which 14 young women were killed in the École Polytechnique in Montreal. He had a list of women, prominent women, that he wanted to kill, and among them was Francine Pelletier.
I think it was 2 days after the tragic event, the editor-in-chief phoned me and said, had I read the newspaper yet? And I said, no. And he said, well, brace yourself, because your name was part of a list of women's names that was leaked to us, who he said he would have liked to have killed.
The Montreal massacre has changed the lives of many people, as it haunts many more, mine included. From the time I found my name on Lepine's hit list, I have felt the need to get inside the man's head, find out what could have possibly motivated such hatred.
People ask me always, how did you react? I was angry at how this had happened. This is, I think, part of why I get emotional about it. It was Lepine's message. It wasn't just that he wanted to use women as a scapegoat for his anger. He was saying that he was against women's liberation.
I think it's okay for reporters to go into areas where they've had direct experience and tell these stories, as long as they let the audience know where they're coming from, and that it's still based on the facts that you uncover and display. And it can give the film an edge that I think is important. An edge and also an authenticity.
I'm saying this only days after the re-election of Donald Trump. And if there is a lesson there, is that we are not out of it. We are still paying. Women are still paying for trying to be everything they want to be.
When I started in journalism, every city hall across the country was
carefully being scrutinized by journalists and legislatures, school boards, and many other institutions. If you go around the country, you will find a lot of these places have no reporters at all sometimes watching what's going on. Well, how can you have oversight? How can you have accountability of what politicians are doing or how governments are being influenced if there's no one there watching?
Well, I think we live in very dangerous times now. What we're facing is unparalleled, where an algorithm can discern so much about people and their beliefs and can then feed them information to foster bias.
The telling of stories, the trying to understand what's happening around us, the search for the truth and the demanding of accountability, that is age-old, that does not change. And so part of that means that as journalists, we have to continue to fight to do that kinds of thing.
When you see the kind of cuts that have been happening over the last few years, it's just one of this painful attrition. And you need investigative shows like The Fifth Estate, like W5, like 16 by 9, like newspapers like the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and every other newspaper across the country. Where are people going to go when they have been the victims of a major scam, let's say a sexual assault or a sexual abuse in the workplace, or a police stepping over the line? Where are people going to go? Who's going after the bad guys today?
Truth is the wooliest word in the English language. Everybody has truth as part of their moral makeup. Biggest liars in the world believe in truth. I believe in the word objectivity, which is a very difficult word too. I think you really do have to subtract your own personal preferences from an assessment of a situation to see what's right and what's wrong. Otherwise, you become what we like to call a hack. You become a propagandist. And it's the greatest menace to communication in the world right now.
I think as a journalist, you have to be optimistic to survive in this business. But let's be honest, let's look at the headwinds. We've got the political shouts against us are getting louder. The financial constraints are getting bigger. We're dealing now with artificial intelligence, which makes it harder to tell the difference between fact and fiction. You've got misinformation, you've got disinformation. But because of all those reasons, I think there's never been a time where we've needed the Fifth Estate like we need it now.
We know what stories have to be told. We've told them for 50 years. And in many ways, they don't change much. If you look at Benny Hinn and Peter Nygaard and Gerald Regan, they're all the same types of men. And they're mostly men who act the way they do and who need the kind of scrutiny that the Fifth Estate has provided. We work for you. You tell us what you expect from us. You tell us what you want to see on the Fifth Estate in the half century to come.
Good evening. I'm Adrienne Clarkson.
I'm Warren Troyer.
Peter Riley.
I'm Eric Malling.
Bob Johnston. Ian Parker.
Hello, I'm Hannah Gartner.
Sheila McVicker.
And I'm Victor Malarick.
I'm Lyndon McIntyre.
Stevie Cameron.
Trish Wood.
Hello, I'm Francine Pelletier.
I'm Anna Maria Tremonti.
I'm Gillian Findlay.
I'm Mark Kelley.
I'm Steven D'Souza.
And I'm Bob McKeown. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.